Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. And thank you all for having me here. I am thrilled to talk about the stuff I'm working on. Well, thrilled might be a little bit of an exaggeration. Jim asked me to talk specifically about the challenges and lessons learned we're having for recruitment for a new wave of data collection, which sort of is akin to sharing my personal trauma for the next 20 minutes. So I'm going to bracket that part and talk about that a bit, and we can go into more detail in the Q&A, but I'll also talk about some of the more positive things that are coming out of the study. So I'll give a little bit of background on the current data collection effort, which is called the NC Life Study. It's still underway. In fact, I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between Durham and Chapel Hill because we're having meetings. It's kind of an interesting time to be collecting data under an NIH R01 under the auspices of understanding long-term consequences of structural racism. So we have a lot to go through. Okay, so the background of this starts with Susan Ennett, my wonderful PI on the original data collection, the original study that actually I only got involved in thanks to Jim, because Susan reached out to, she knew Jim was a networks master, and she asked if he would be interested in working on the project, and thankfully for me, he said he could not because I wouldn't be here. I don't know what I would be doing if I didn't get involved with this study. But Jim mentioned me as a backup, inferior backup. And so she said yes, and so I got involved with the data collection, which was already underway at the time. But anyway, this project started out as a proposal to analyze ad health data, which was then rejected. And so she came back with an order of magnitude more money requested, and that was funded for a new data collection. And the project was largely modeled on ad health. So, you know, and it's better in some ways and worse in others. It's better if you're a networks person, if you like, you know, more waves of data to analyze. It's worse in that it's not nationally representative. It's local, and it's an interesting, unique population. So it started with all kids who are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in public school in 3 North Carolina counties, and I think I can now, at this point, the counties are out of the bag. It's Vance, Person, and Moore counties, which were selected because they are not Wake County, they're not Orange County, the counties that have been studied to death. They were counties that had been more or less overlooked, which brings some interesting advantages and disadvantages for when we talk about our data. So it was about 8,200 kids were eligible, and we got at least one wave of participation from 7,200 of them. And so, and as kids joined those cohort grades, they were allowed to enter the study. So people came and went, as is typical. We also have another study, a follow-up survey of the parents from a random subsample that's been underutilized. This is the data structure. So you have the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders followed all the way through 12th grade for the oldest cohort. As I said, it's modeled on ad health, and it has a kind of a wide range of topic areas with a lot of depth in some. It's woefully deficient when if you're interested in romantic relationships, unfortunately, which was one of the areas that these schools were not comfortable with us asking about. Although it has great dating violence data. For the network stuff, we have kind of a traditional best friend name generator, up to 5 of the best friends, and then there's pretty standard questions about their interaction frequencies, parental, do their kids know, parents know each other, and so on. I can get into these details if there's any interest. But the thing that was, I think, sort of new at the time, and maybe less so now, was that we were able to, thanks to Susan advocating, we were able to add questions about aggression networks, which was my area of interest. And it took a lot of battles with the IRB. There was one board member in particular who had been bullied as a young person and was really reluctant to allow this to go through for fear that it could trigger additional bullying. We were fortunately able to point to research that suggested that has looked at that very question and found that no uptick in aggressive behavior. But so we have bullying relationships from both directions, from the bully's perspective, from the victim's perspective. We kind of, in practice, what we've ended up doing is combining those networks such that we count a tie from A to B if A nominates B as a victim or B nominates A as a bully. Okay, so a lot of stuff has come out of the context study. I think last time I counted was about $12 million in grants. 50 or so papers have come out of it. And it's really rich data, and I feel like it's not fully tapped. But it is old. And so it's long been a dream of mine to follow up and see where these people are. I feel like I've spent my entire life, at least my professional life, studying them. And they've been stuck in time, frozen in time. And meanwhile, now they're in their mid 30s now, and kind of closing in on their late 30s. So thanks to the efforts of my collaborators, we were able to secure funding for the NC Life study, which is intended to follow up with a new wave of data collection from the original context participants. Again, under the auspices of NIDA program on the long-term consequences of structural racism and discrimination. So here's the study team. Leanne has been where are you, Leanne? Has been an invaluable collaborator and is the backbone of a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you today. In fact, was sending me stuff within the last hour, was sending me some tables that I needed. So I'm going to skip some of these details, but this is again the data structure. We have 3 cohorts that started out roughly 11, 12 years old, and then there's a 20-year gap, and now they're in their mid-30s. And so the question is, one of the problems we've had is try how to get them to tell us what their lives are like now. We developed a survey that it's got a lot of chefs in this kitchen. There's a lot of people with different interests involved, and so it's kind of a hodgepodge of stuff. There's folks who are interested in HIV. There's some sort of standard things you'd want to know. There's questions about health, substance use, and so on that NIDA was particularly interested in. But it's kind of a hodgepodge. But for the networks audience, I thought I would go into a little more detail on the network items. We ask, one of the things we're interested in and what Leanne has worked on is the significance of stable relationships for people. And so one of the things we were particularly interested in is whether we get pretty strong effects for network stability while kids are in school. And one of the questions we were particularly interested in was whether those persist across longer time frames. So we are asking, we were showing the respondents the people they named as friends while they were in high school, and asking if they're still friends, and if they're not, we're also kind of interested in the question of negative ties and if there's any falling out stories that we could gather. We're also similarly finally getting some retrospective data on romantic relationships that we were not able to collect during the original data collection. Questions about bullying. We're interested in whether people remember. I've never fully, I've always questioned, how accurate the bullying data. One wrong number, if as a kid is filling out a bubble sheet, could mean that somebody's being accused of something that they didn't do. And so we were interested in whether kids actually, or adults actually remember who was bullying them while they were in middle and high school. So we have follow-up questions about that. And then we're collecting some current ego network data. Okay, so recruitment. This is what Jim asked me to talk about. Some of the research on panel data recruitment suggests that there are kind of 4 pillars of a successful recruitment approach. One is tracing, so being able to track down the folks that you want to track down. and one of the things they emphasize is making sure you have, this is the Framingham study in a nutshell. This is how we got such great network data, was because they asked people in that study to also give the contact information of close friends and associates. Barrier reduction, so making it easy to collect data. Community building, developing a sense that this is a larger project, larger than themselves, something that they want to be motivated intrinsically to participate in. And we kind of did all these things. And then, of course, follow-up, just communication, reaching out, making sure you're keeping tabs on your subject. So we did all these things, but one thing we were not able to do successfully, I think, was the community building aspect. We were able to trace, in a nutshell, we were able to find people, but it's hard to not talk to somebody for 20 years and then come back and say, hey, this is a great study you were involved in when you were in middle school. So on the tracing front, we were able to recruit an army of volunteer RAs, undergraduates, who successfully found 92% of our eligible participants. 2/3 of which I think we have fairly high confidence that we've matched the right person. And then, in the event that they do take the survey, we have a lot of verification processes involved. So we're not getting false data. It's possible we have initial false matches on the tracing front, but when they actually participate in the survey, we have a pretty detailed screener to make sure that we're talking to the right people. The majority of these people never left North Carolina. And actually about 2/3 reside either in those original counties or very nearby ones. 670 of these people could not be traced. We could not find any record of them anywhere. And I got kind of interested in that particular rabbit hole. Why I was focusing on the 8% we couldn't find instead of the 93 or 2 or 3% that we could. So it turns out, but it's kind of an interesting question, like who disappears from the state, the view of the state, as far as we can tell. And one of the issues is name frequency. So people with very common names have we would have a hard time matching them. But adjusting for the frequency, according to the census, of their first and last names, we found that it's disproportionately Latinx youth who did not comprise too much of our original sample. And then disconnected kids with low end degree, and ones who did not participate in the survey, and also kids who moved around a lot. So none of these things are especially shocking. But it was also interesting, though, that they resided when we knew where they resided in less rural and less poor block groups, which was a little surprising. So this is where they are in the networks. The blue dots are current participants. The red dots are the folks we could not find, who are, it's hard to tell, but they are disproportionately represented among those isolates. Here they are in space. This is Moore County. And you can't really tell anything from that, except, I'll just, trust me on this, they're more concentrated down here. Same thing for the other two counties. I just like maps. Okay, so tracing was not a problem. The next issue is how do we get people to actually participate in our survey? We started off by offering a $50 gift certificate or a gift card, which Leanne was in charge of administering and sending out. And so she had to deal with all the angry people who said, where's my money? And then we also offered incentives for referrals, successful referrals. We have a website. It's called nclife.org. Feel free to check it out. We just had it revamped by some professionals. And we did a whole lot of texting and calling. We had these undergraduates making phone calls, cold calling these folks, reaching out on social media. We did Spotify ads. We did various social media ads. We did even radio ads. We sent postcards. We sent letters. We did we had flyers in the coffee shops. We went to churches. We had a fair amount of in-person contact in these counties. Leanne, how many times did you go out to these counties? 10? Okay, yeah. And there were other folks going out to there and meeting people on the street and handing them flyers. So we put a lot of effort into it. There was a lot of, and that, that's not easy. That takes person hours to complete. We also developed a community ambassador program where we're trying to recruit people that we think might be kind of influential. And we have had disappointing results. Even it corresponds to the level of confidence we have in the original tracing, but of the ones that we're most confident that we have the right person, we have 13% response rates. So we'll get into the costs. So basically, we spent a whole lot of money on ads and social media and consultants, and it was worthless, absolutely worthless. We got almost nothing out of that. We got almost everything out of our volunteer RA labor. So this is another image of the spending. So less than 1% of our subjects came from the online recruitment stuff that we were doing, and that was eating up a huge amount of the cost. So, okay. Fortunately, so ultimately the results are disappointing. So far, we're not done yet. We're still collecting data, but it's looking a bit rough. But fortunately, North Carolina has made available pretty rich, as a fairly open state in terms of public records, and we are learning a lot about these folks through their official records that are compiled by the state. We've also gone back and collected retrospective data using our education records that we've gotten from the North Carolina Educational Research Data Center, which has complete transcripts, test scores, discipline, and most, I think, important for some of us, the disciplinary records for these kids during their time in schools. We've expanded. We had the original data and all subsequent data geocoded, so we have expanded our measures of neighborhood characteristics, and I'll show you some cool maps that one of my colleagues has put together. And we have, thanks to North Carolina again, we have pretty detailed criminal justice contact histories. And we're still scouring public records. So now a lot of our effort has shifted to what we can get from these other data sources. And finally, we have the original high school yearbooks, which I think are still, I feel like I've done a little bit of stuff with them, but I think they're underutilized. So, okay, but still, it's been a tough go. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're working on now. The first is a paper on interracial violence in schools. And two questions we're trying to consider in this paper are, first, is interracial violence more or less likely than intraracial violence after accounting for exposure? Criminologists know that interracial crime or violence is unlikely in cities because people of different races do not come into regular contact with each other as often as they do with folks of their own race. So after accounting for exposure, though, there are compelling arguments to suggest that, in fact, we should expect higher rates of interracial conflict and violence. And then secondly, we're also looking at the consequences side of it. So are the consequences of interracial violence more significant for victims than those of intraracial victimization? So in this case, we're looking at internalizing problems, substance abuse, school attachment, and changes in grade point average. So it was we were able to do analyses on 10 of our schools that range in size from about 100 to over 1,000. And this is what we find. This is an ERGA model summarizing each column. These are just the significant results. The dashes are negative results. These are the different schools. And so what we find is that, so we're controlling, we find that white to black dyads are significantly less likely to to be aggressive, as are black to white dyads. And that's interesting because we're controlling for the social distance separating the two. I mean, even within the school, kids, well, we see that schools are to varying degrees segregated, so they're not necessarily socializing together, but even after you take that into consideration. And also shared activities, we have other measures of propinquity, but we still find this fairly strong negative effect across the board for mixed race dyads. There's some reluctance or avoidance of aggressive ties between across racial boundaries. So the question is why is that? One of the things we looked at just hours ago, Leanne sent me this, which is explores the question of whether there's an interaction between social distance and mixed race dyads. And in some, no, there doesn't seem to be, except for one school. So basically, the avoidance of forming an aggressive tie across racial lines is not moderated by the social distance separating the two kids in the dyad. On the consequences side, we find, we estimate some fixed effects models where we decompose the aggression in degree by the race of the aggressor in the relationship, the gender, and the social distance separating them. And also we separate, in many models, we separate physical violence from other forms of aggression. And I can get into those details. There's not a lot of difference, so I don't make too much out of it. But what we find is that net of intra-racial victimization, we do not really find much in the way of consequences for interracial victimization. Has no significant pernicious effect on internalizing problems, substance abuse, or school attachment for either black or white students. There's two exceptions. We find one, that black and white youth are distressed by bullying from Latinx and other racial groups. And this category of kids includes some where the racial category was missing, and so there's likely to be a fair number of same race dyads mixed in with this, so take that with a grain of salt. But then we do see that white youth experience a decline in their GPAs after being bullied by black students. But basically, we're finding that these are sort of unexpected, at least for me, unexpected results. So interracial aggression is highly unlikely, even after we account for social distance, and largely inconsequential. And I think part of the answer might be found in Gould's arguments about collective violence, but you have to torture it a little bit. So I can get into these. These are the consequences. That's what a typical network looks like. It's fair. These schools are fairly segregated socially. How much time?
I can get a clarifying question.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there other pernicious negative effects to
Yes. Yeah, I can get into that if you like. But yes, there are, and there is for overall. But once you have both in the model. And we also looked at it as a proportion. So we see that if you just take total degree and then you have a percent intra or inter, there's no effect. Okay, so that's paper number 1. Okay, good. And paper number 2 is being led by John Hipp, where this is not especially networky really at all, but it has cool maps. I like maps. So this is being led by John Hipp, where we're trying to expand on our conceptualization of structural racism and discrimination at various geographic units, ranging from block groups to county level. And we're incorporating fairly newly available data on things that feel like they might be implicated in structural racism. You know, the percent of bars and liquor and convenience stores, fringe banks like payday lenders, pawn shops, and so on. Things like that intrinsically feel like they might be implicated at the neighborhood level, and then some more standard measures of black and white socioeconomic disadvantage. And so depending on which measure you put in, this is Moore County. Things can look quite differently geographically. This is eviction rates in Moore County. This is the fringe banks. So if we were relying only on fringe banks, There's effectively none, except for just a couple neighborhoods. So that wouldn't be a great measure to rely on. This is educational attainment differences, income, labor force participation, another measure of income. Anyway, we have a lot of these. There's a lot of dimensions to this, and but latent class models, which combine them in different ways, boil it down to two dimensions. One relates to disadvantaged neighborhoods, just absolute disadvantage, things that, having toxic sites near where you live, things that are just inherently bad to live near, and then relative, so it's an absolute and a relative disadvantage. Those are the two dimensions to this, and it turns out that they improve our predictions of lifespan and other measures of health over traditional measures of structural racism. Okay, so shifting back to lessons learned. The first is, don't wait 20 years. Plan ahead. Just build in. Successful recruitment means building that community, and it's not something you can do in a year or two. It's something you need to do along the way. Also, don't try to call people to participate in a survey in a swing state during an election cycle. Don't waste money on social media or consultants. And instead, unfortunately, I think this type of data collection is going to require a lot of boots on the ground and community involvement. And had we done that earlier, we might, I might be talking to you about results from the survey rather than why we don't have enough people. We also had we spent a lot of time dealing with fraud. That's another thorny issue, and between bots that are getting better and better, and people who are trying to fill out the survey twice for friends and so on. We had to deal with that a lot. And thanks goodness for the North Carolina and its policies around public records access. A lot of states, had we been doing this in Virginia, we would just be sunk. There's not a lot available, and you have to pay quite a bit of money for each record. So I also wanted to sort of put out a pitch. The data are old, but I think they're still valuable, and we have fortunately a new generation of scholars working on the context study and the NC Life study, and there's a lot of folks involved, but there's room for collaboration. So if this seems like it might be of interest to you, especially if you're sort of in the early stages of your career, please reach out. And just in general, I think we should reconsider data that seem old and see if there are ways to kind of freshen it up. Add to it. I think there's at least 2 more cool papers to be done with the yearbook stuff alone. So with that, I will leave it to you for questions. So, thank you. Way in the back.
So I know you mentioned that as far as like boots on the ground kind of recruit, you mentioned football games in schools.
Uh-huh.
One thing that strikes me is like schools have reunions, right?
Yes, they're coming up. Yes, their 20th. We're going to be there.
Because it's an event specifically tailored for
Yes.
your population of interest. Okay, so they just haven't happened.
Yes, their 20ths are coming up in the next few years, and if we aren't terminated, even if we are terminated, we're going to come back with a new plan to measuring the long-term impacts of structural racism. A totally new study. Yeah. Yeah, well, when they started, they were in 6th grade. So, yeah. Yes?
I guess I'm curious, did you find that interracial social distance remained pretty constant 20 years later, or
We don't know. We haven't looked at the new data yet, but and I hope that we ultimately get enough responses to be able to answer that question. But so far I'm nervous. Yeah.
Can you speak a bit about recruitment for the first wave? I know it's been a long time.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we were. Great question. It's totally not replicatable at all. Susan, she picked these schools in part because they hadn't been studied, and these schools, because they hadn't been studied, said, "Oh sure, here's all our kids' addresses. And they did passive consent. When I was in grad school, I was out in the schools with Scantron bubble sheets, and it would just not be possible today, unfortunately. So yeah, there was a passive consent process, so parents had to actively opt out, which meant that we had, in the first wave, we had like 90-some% response rates, which declined a little over time, but it was still pretty darn good. Yeah. Yeah.
Any features of the networks, like beyond individual level, predict finding people, like anyone who works at school?
That's a good question. We haven't looked at the school level effects. At the individual level, they tend to, the people we don't find are less connected. But that's a good question if we see stronger patterns at the school level. I'll get back to you. Yes.
I've seen social media with other apps used for recruitment. There's studies to your thoughts on why,
It's expensive. The targeting, we are looking for, I think it might be okay if you don't need to find very specific people. And we're trying to find very specific people who are living in disproportionately rural counties in North Carolina. And it's just hard. It's hard to get ads that are hard to find, cost-effective advertising strategies through social media that pinpoint, where your hotspots. Because your hotspots, like, there's still, even when you're in these counties, there's still, the vast majority of people, even in that school radius, have no connection to the study. So that's quite a challenge for that. Yes.
Just curious, were you able to, or did you try to use the friendship validations or the persistent friends?
Yes, we've been targeting specifically sorry, Jim, I think I anticipated your question, but.
I think so. When you ask people about their persistent friends in high school, you discovered who their persistent friends were in high school, or in the first ways, you ask the ones who responded if they know where these people are now?
Yes, we were trying to encourage referrals, and we haven't looked at the, so you're asking whether the people who we say yes, we're still friends, and are you asking that from a recruitment perspective? Yeah.
Hey, you named Moody as your friend back in 6th grade. You know where he is? You can't find him.
Yeah. Well, the problem is we can find him. He just won't answer our calls.
Oh.
And so, yeah, we know where 92% of these folks are, and again, the majority are still, the vast majority are still in those same counties, and maybe Leanne can speak to a little bit more. Yeah.
we got a lot of responses to the screener. I think we screened over 200,000 people.
Yeah.
We're looking specifically for those 7,000, and those people are just not answering.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're just looking for a wide range of people, the social media will work. But if you're looking to follow the specific people, that's where it wasn't worth the cost. At the end of the survey, we asked them to give us the contact information of people they still do in high school to try and contact them. But then it was again, they just weren't answering the phone or weren't responding.
Yeah, we're getting our best results through text and email and calling, and I think the postcards that we sent. But it's still a lot of people just are, you're bombarded, especially during election season. Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah.
Not a question, more of a comment. I also work with the rural cohort. Something we've had success with were county fairs.
Yeah, we've tried to go to. Did we do a county fair? We did football games. We've gone to.
Farmers markets. I think Emily Hutchins is a graduate student at UNC who's been at the head of the recruitment on this. She's finishing this year, but she went to football games. She went to different farmers markets.
Churches.
We weren't in time for the NC County Fair, State Fair, churches. We went to coffee shops. I walked into schools
Yeah.
They all have like alarms and doorbells now, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like meeting, like harmless looking white person they let me into school. And would talk to people. There were some people I run into who work in the school who happened to be in the survey that we could get to, but it's really just getting them to fill out the survey. That was the hardest thing.
Yeah.
So I have two questions. One of them is going to sound that maybe this is like too invasive, but from the state data standpoint, since you've already found these people, they probably have kids that are in school.
Yes, we've been.
And can you sort of utilize that because you do know where they have to go every day to pick up their kids.
We don't know. We don't yet. I mean, we know they probably have kids. We haven't identified their kid. We haven't matched the people to kids yet because I think kids
Elementary schools in the area and like ask to hand out flyers for parents.
and daycare centers. Yeah.
Yeah, right now the respondents we do have, their kids are around like kindergarten, first grade age, so we went to all of the elementary schools and handed out flyers. The ones that would let us, they sent out flyers via like the listservs.
Well, the reason I'm asking that is that might be a little crazy. But done in a particular way. The question I wanted to ask was, do you have thoughts about intergenerational past? So the structure of the position of the students in the school, and particularly in the bullying network. To what extent do you feel like there's a chance that there's theory behind it that that could transmit to their children? Is it like a learned behavior that they've held within them, and then how do their children sort of express that when they're in school? Or is it actually the reverse? So are the kids of people who are bullied become the bullies in a sort of Freudian?
Yeah. I think. Yeah. Good question. And I can only speculate because I don't have data on it. But I think, my take on it is that the modeling, when adults engage in these behaviors, I think it looks different, and they don't do it the way a 10th grader doesn't do it the same way a 5th grader does. An adult doesn't do it the same way a 10th grader does. And so I think the modeling is probably going to be pretty indirect. And I think it's probably more around prioritizing status and valuing that. And one of the interesting things, the paper I did with Leanne is we find that, the more kids care about being popular, and not every kid does, but the more they do, the more likely they are to become popular and to engage in these behaviors, which then reinforces, improves their status, but also reinforces that value for them. But conversely, the kids who prioritize having a close group of friends care less about status. They tend to retain their friends over time, and also tend to desist from those behaviors. So we have a virtuous cycle and a vicious cycle. And so if parents are modeling and kind of subtly reinforcing their own social standing or that of their kids, I think that is, my guess is that's the pathway that is inherited through.
I think we have to.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm happy to talk. Yeah.
We have to build the jokes at the end. We're going to have to hold your questions.
Oh,
in,
yeah.
get Bob still around, and otherwise.
Yeah, I'll be around. Thank you.